Today we're going to talk about the practice of roadmaps, and here to help me is Sarah Dickinson, one of our product managers. Sarah, could you start out by helping make a distinction between the different levels of planning on an Agile project? I know people get confused between what's iteration planning versus what's release planning, and where does a roadmap even fit in
Absolutely.
to all of that?
So I think of a roadmap as your top level, and within a roadmap you have multiple releases, and then within each release you have features.
Mm-hmm.
And then at release planning, we're taking one of those releases and further breaking it down into stories, which then would actually be broken down even farther into tasks.
In your iteration planning.
Exactly, in your iteration planning.
So the key thing about a roadmap is it's multiple releases. It shows you where
Yes.
you're going over multiple releases.
Exactly.
If you're just talking about a single release, that's probably a release plan.
Exactly. And with a roadmap, you may be looking out 4 months, 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road, so that you can look at those very high level items. What are we trying to accomplish here, rather than at the detailed level?
So it's a high level view. So a roadmap could go out like a year, multiple years?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, we need to know where we're going. Because while many things can change along the way, we know that there are certain goalposts that we want to kick the ball through.
Sure. Yeah, I worked at one government client where they wanted a roadmap literally out 5 years. And, that kind of begs the question of why. Is it really important? I mean, obviously, any plan that shows you what you're going to do in 5 years is not going to match reality when you get there.
Right.
But even at a smaller level, why bother? Why have a roadmap?
So I think it's that document that everyone can circle around and say, okay, I understand what we're going to be working on, and generally in what order. Have you ever seen an example of where there was not a roadmap and it ended up coming back to haunt people?
Actually, yes. Speaking of haunting and Halloween, we had a team recently that we had a long-term contract with this client, and all the team knew about was that there was a release in July, and they knew what had to happen for that release in July, but there was no knowledge on the team's part about what came afterwards. And that I talked with the team. That actually made them pretty uneasy, not just from are we going to be working after July point of view, but more importantly, they felt like, well, if we could just understand the broader context, we could make better decisions even for this release and these stories we're building if we had some idea of the direction of the company. And so the fact that either there was no roadmap or this roadmap wasn't shared with the team was problematic for this team, because they felt like they were missing important context to make good decisions.
And as we were talking a little bit about the team, who do you feel needs to be involved whenever you're creating a roadmap?
Well, obviously, you should have a product manager there that knows what they're doing. And it definitely is something that is the client's decision. So this is not an area where the team drives. But the team that's working on this software is in a great position to offer inputs and feedback. And so I recommend that, just like we update our release plan every iteration, that we update a roadmap at least once every release. And that you should involve, if not the whole team, at least the team leadership in that exercise.
Absolutely. And you talk about updating it because, it should change. And I think that's a fear that people have. They're like, oh, well, I'm going to write this down in January and I'm not going to touch it again until December.
Right. And that's we run into that at all different levels in planning, like we talked about at the beginning. The fact that we know that something's going to change is not a good reason to not do it, to not put the work into doing it. Right. The value, like we talked about in release planning, the value is in the exercise itself. And so having to periodically put on paper where we think we're going is useful, even though we will learn and we'll discover, that this feature doesn't make sense for December, it needs to be pushed up to September, or this feature that we thought we needed next year, we no longer need, we need something else instead. So yeah, the roadmap doesn't lock you in. On the contrary, it helps you understand where we think we're going so that we're in a better position to embrace change. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. I think that, without knowing where we're going, where are we going? And, it allows us to invite that commentary and have those discussions, because if we didn't have the roadmap at all, we would have nothing to talk about. So I often will pull together roadmaps that I know may have some things that we've talked about, and I just throw them on and some dates, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. Does this make sense? And then I can welcome the input, and we can change it. It's very much like the Lego blocks. We can move them around and slide them around as necessary.
As long as you've got the blocks.
As long as you've got the blocks to start with.
So what was that saying of your husband's again?
If you don't know where you're going, where are you going?
If you don't know where you're going, where are you going? So do a roadmap.
Yes.